myself and for those that if you're new to class, we record all of our courses, all of our events here. So just make sure if you have missed a session or two, do your best to catch up, and they'll be on the YouTube channel, inshallah. Sign-up sheets are going around, so just do me a favor and make sure everybody signs up clearly. Name and your email, that'd be great. And announcements, we have a few afterwards, inshallah. Let's go ahead and get started. So we stopped at the Battle of Uhud. The Battle of Uhud, right? Now this is the second battle in Islam. The first battle was the Battle of Badr, right? This was with the Muslims and the pagans or the non-Muslims at that time. There was about 1,000 non-Muslims at that time versus about 300 Muslims, okay? So as we discussed, a few different things happened. Now we come to the Battle of Uhud, okay? Or getting started with the Battle of Uhud. Now because the Quraysh, and the Quraysh was the leading tribe in Mecca, the polytheists, because they lost, obviously they wanted to take revenge. They wanted to say, you know what, we need to get an eye for an eye. We need to have a revenge. Because the Muslims won in the first battle, the Battle of Badr, okay? So, the Muslims, obviously, they knew that, you know what, the Quraysh, anytime, any moment, something's going to happen in the sense that they would love their revenge. They would want their revenge. So, Medina, the city where the Muslims are, Medina being the city north of Mecca, it was on high alert. High alert just basically meaning that, hey, just always be prepared that anything can possibly happen, okay? Now, at this time, we keep coming up with a name. The name is Abu Sufyan. If you guys probably remember this name, Abu Sufyan. Abu Sufyan was basically at this time the indirect leader of the Quraysh, the non-Muslims. The indirect leader of the Quraysh, okay? And that is because if you remember in the Battle of Badr, the first battle, many of the senior leadership, they died in the battle, in the war, right? So thus, whoever was next would be indirectly the leader, and that would be Abu Sufyan. There are still some senior notables there, but he'd be one of those that were probably one of the most senior, okay? Now, so Abu Sufyan would take part in a few different things before the actual Battle of Uhud started. And that would be that one specific example was he took part in raiding or coming close to some of the farms in Medina. So from Mecca, he would come to Medina with some horsemen, and they would kind of attack some of the farms, some of the villages just outside of Medina, right? And then he would attack these farms and he would just run away. So what happened was the Muslims then pursued him. They pursued him, and what happened, because when Abu Sufyan, he went and attacked these farms, he took some of the items, or these could be the items that they came with because of the journey, right? They started to, in order for them to fasten up, because their mode of transportation at that time, as we discussed, were like horses and mules and donkeys and camels, right? So thus, in order for you to go faster, you would have to take off some of the supplies that you were carrying. So what they did was, because the Muslims were coming, since they attacked their farms, the Quraysh, as the Quraysh left and the Muslims were pursuing them, they would drop all of their stuff from their modes of transportation. This is why that was known as the Battle of Sawiq. It was not actually a battle, but because of the context, it was called the Battle of Sawiq. Sawiq basically just means like grains and barley and food. So a good way to remember this is just remember Sawiq refers to those things like barley and food and grains. And the reason for that is because as they were going after them, they would just toss them off. So the Quraysh got away, right, because they were on load and they got back to Mecca. But this obviously sent a signal to the Muslims to stay on high alert, because though this was a little bit outside of Medina, this still is something that took place and it happened, okay? Now, coming to the actual Battle of Uhud, okay? This took place in the third year of AH, after Hijrah, right? So remember the calendar starts, in the Islamic calendar, it starts when the Muslims go from Mecca to Medina. This is where you start the beginning of the Islamic calendar, right? Now we're in the third year. So third year AH, after Hijrah, the Prophet Muhammad, so anytime we just say Prophet, obviously we're referring to the final Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He gets news, because remember they still have intelligence going on, what's going on. He gets news that, you know what, the Quraysh were setting out with about 3,000 people. Okay? It's about almost a year later, because if you remember the Battle of Badr was about a year before this, okay? So they get news that about 3,000 people from the Quraysh, the non-Muslims, they're coming to attack Medina, right? So in this happening, in the 3,000 people, if you see the Battle of Badr, how many people were there on the Quraysh side, the non-Muslim side? Approximately? Close, yeah, this is 3,000, but in the Battle of Badr, about 1,000, right? So close to about 1,000. Now you see a jump up to 3,000. And one of the reasons you'll see is a lot of propaganda going on. People are pumping them up. It's kind of like when you have news today, you have social media, you're trying to deliver a message, you're going to hype it up, regardless of how you go about that information, right? So at this time, you have a lot of people wanting to financially support the Quraysh because of, some of the family members that were lost in battle and so forth. And at the same time, just kind of pumping up the whole ideology and the idea that, hey, we need to get revenge, right? This is why they're able to muster up close to about 3,000 soldiers. On the Muslims' end, they got up to about 1,000. So when they assessed and they looked and they say, you know what, we have about 1,000. And this is a big jump as well, because in the Battle of Badr, the first battle, we talked about the Muslims having approximately 300 soldiers, right? 300 soldiers, now it's about 1,000. But still, if you look at the odds, it's like, 3 to 1. You have 3,000 against 1,000, okay? So, as the Prophet does, and as he always does, he consulted with his companions. We call them the Sahaba, or you can say the disciples, right? And we'll ask them, what should we do? This is the news that we're getting. This is the intelligence. We have about 3,000 people coming. What should we do, okay? Now, and the reason he's asking them, because, and you'll find this as a common theme with the Prophet Muhammad and in the seerah, in the life of the Prophet, that he's always consulting. He's always consulting with his companions, always consulting to see how should we move about, right? Now, the Prophet didn't want to leave the city because you're in Medina, you have people coming to Medina, right? He said, the understanding was, let's protect the city and let's stay within the city grounds. But then some of the younger companions, some of the younger generation, they said, you know what, we should go out and we should meet them, right? We should go out and we should meet them, right? Meaning we should, or more about, because the understanding they had was that they weren't able to join the first battle, the Battle of Badr. Some of the youngsters, the younger generation, they weren't able to join that battle. So in this one, they wanted to really have a voice. They wanted to really say, hey, you know what, we want to take part, right? And so also, you get recognition. Recognition means those that took part in the Battle of Badr, the first battle, they were recognized as people that, this is years later, they would say, this is a companion that was part of the Battle of Badr, right? So it's a type of recognition that one was given, okay? So basically what happened was, they ended up leaving Medina, not fortifying and staying in the city. They took the other opinion of leaving outside the city, okay? So they went to a place called Uhud, or Mount Uhud, which is approximately 2 miles outside of Medina. 2 miles outside of Medina, you have the mountain of Uhud, or the area, okay? This is where the battle is going to take place. So just a point of reference to know where these battles begin. Many a times you just trail it by its name. Badr, the wells of Badr, the area of Badr, and so forth, okay? Now, we said how many people were in the Muslim army? The Muslim army, about 1,000, right? So 1,000, they're going, okay? What happens at this time, if you remember this name, Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul, he was the leader of the hypocrites, the munafiqun, right? That from the outside they professed that they were Muslim, but in the inside they had nothing to do with Islam. They said, you know what, our suggestion was that we should have stayed in Medina. Why did we leave? You guys didn't listen to us? So him and about 300 of the hypocrites, they left the army. Imagine this, you're going to meet your enemy in battle. You have a significant portion, right? Out of the 1,300 of them, they say, you know what, we're not following this, we leave. So the number comes down to 700, right? But this was in a way, or in many ways, this was a blessing. Why would this be a blessing? Because somebody can look at it in a negative way, right? Like, oh my God, 1,000 minus 300 now, so we only have 700. What are we going to do? But the Muslims' mentality should always be proactive and always a positive, right? How can this be something very productive? How can this be something very positive? Okay? What else? Think about it. Not that the answer is there on the slide, but it's okay. So what God is doing, He's purifying the army. He's purifying the ranks of the Muslims to see those that are sincere from those that are not sincere. So it's almost a filtering process, right? You can almost see as a filtering process that the Muslims are saying, you know what, praise be to God, alhamdulillah, and they're praising God because they know of individuals that are not fully committed. So this group of about 300, they leave, right? Known as the munafiqun, okay? Now, once they reached the Mount Uhud, or this area where the battle is going to take place, right? The Prophet, and this is very important, some of the, again, remember the life of the Prophet, you have a lot of snapshots. This happened. So what historians, what scholars do, they try to construct all of this into giving us an idea of what happened, right? Because there's so many different things going on. Again, this class is an overview. We're not going into depth. Each of these points, you can go into depth, but we're just having an overview, okay? So just always know that there's many other different things that are happening, but I'm trying to highlight some of the most important things that are happening, okay? At this time, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, once they reached the mountain of Uhud, there's like a hill area. So he says, and he assigns 50 Muslims to go to this hill area as archers. As archers, right? So in case the battle is getting intense and somebody tries to come, you have some protection on the top with archers, meaning, like bow and arrow and so forth, right? So he assigned 50 people there, and he said specifically, don't move from here. Don't move from here. This is where you are assigned. Stay here, okay? So, the battle, and obviously we're not going to go into too much detail, right? But it's a really interesting, lot of interesting things happen in this battle, right? As it is in the first battle as well. Now, as the battle starts, the Quraysh come and the battle continues and the battle starts, right? The Muslims in the beginning are starting to win. They're actually winning the battle. So much so, and remember, what are the numbers? What are we looking at? 700 versus about 3,000. Remember, when we say these numbers, these are approximates. Right? They have to do a ballpark figure. So these are approximates. 3,000 non-Muslims or idol worshippers against 700 believers, 700 Muslims. The battle starts, the battle ensues and begins, right? And remember, at this time, the 300 left. So some of them, it's natural. Imagine the morale of seeing 3,000 people, again, with armor, with cavalry, and so forth, right? But the battle begins and the Muslims start to win. So much so that in the initial battle, in the beginning, they're winning so much that the Quraysh start to retreat. Okay, so just imagine the Quraysh are here and the Muslims are here. They're battling. Now the Muslims are winning, so the Quraysh are leaving. So the Muslims are going after, they're pursuing them, right? As they're leaving, the Quraysh are dropping their things called the spoils of war, meaning whatever they had, their possessions, their swords, shields, whatever. This is something known as ghanimat or booties of war. That means whatever the enemy leaves behind is your property. If they leave it behind, that's your property. Because what do you think was the salary of the soldiers at this time? Anywhere in the world at that time? There was no salary. The salary was the spoils of war, which we're going to see right now. So at this point, there's no you get a check, everyone gets a check, $5,000 a month. You go to this thing, you enlist in this thing. There's no concept of that right now. So your spoils of war, your salary would come from that. Okay? So now, as they're dropping their stuff and so forth, the Muslims are now going and taking these things because it's their rightful property. This is just commonly known in war. What happens is, these archers, what did the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, tell the archers to do? Don't move, stay there. But when they start to see that the Quraysh were retreating, the enemies were retreating, right? And that the Muslims were now going for the spoils, some of them, from this hill, they came down. And then the companions on there, they say, don't leave. The Prophet told us not to leave, right? But they started to leave. What happened then was the Quraysh had a cavalry, horses and some other part of the army on the other side. And it was led by somebody by the name of Khalid ibn Walid. It's a very important person you're going to find in Islamic history, right? In early Islam. At this point, he's not a Muslim. But I'm going to fast forward, he becomes Muslim in some years, okay? It's a very interesting point. He sees this, because remember, he's like the leader of the cavalry and so forth. And they're waiting patiently, so they're not engaging in the war. The war is being engaged, right? He sees that the archers are leaving, so he comes from around them. So now again, you have the Quraysh who are leaving, right? Here, you have the Muslims here. Now you have the cavalry that's coming from the back. They come and they attack the Muslims. So now, because an opening happened, right? The archers were there simply because if somebody came from the back, they can with their bow and arrow, they can take them out. When the Quraysh saw this, as they were retreating, they said, you know what? We're winning. We have some hope. They turned around. The Muslims are here. The cavalry, the Quraysh is here, and the Quraysh is here. They squeeze them in. They squeeze them in. So the Muslims, if you can just imagine with me, they're in the middle, and they're being squeezed on both sides from the Quraysh, the non-Muslim, the enemies, right? So what happens at this time, the battle is ensuing, the battle is beginning, and so At this point, the Prophet himself, peace be upon him, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he gets hit and he falls off his horse. And then the rumor goes out, because remember, the Prophet also taking part in the battle. He's in the midst of the battle, right? He gets hit and he falls off his horse, right? And so what happens is a rumor goes around that he's dead, that he died, right? And so as you can tell, the morale of the Muslims, they're like, you know what? Oh my God, the messenger of God is dead. Some will say, you know what? If he's dead, there's no point in living. Why are we living, right? But then they said, no, he is alive. The messenger of God is alive, right? And they would do this to make sure that the people would still continue, okay? Now, it was very interesting, we don't have the time for it, but you would find that when the Quraysh were attacking the Prophet Muhammad, he would have his companions shielding him, one by one shielding him from the number of enemies that were coming, right? And you would see the sacrifices that these companions made. Wallah, it's amazing. It's so beautiful to see how someone loves Allah so much, and they love the Messenger of God so much, they put their life in front. Right? So you find so many different cases of the companions coming and standing there and giving their own life to make sure that the Prophet is protected. Peace be upon him. Now, the Prophet, it was authentically narrated that he was hit in the face. So they have something called chain link or chain mail armor, and that's like, when you see like some old medieval movies, they have this chain guard and stuff like that. So he had that on, and so two of the pieces from the chain guard, the chain mail they call it, it went into his face. And he was bleeding a lot. He was bleeding a lot, right? But at the same time, when this happens, the Prophet makes a very beautiful supplication. And the translation of it, he said, "Oh Allah, forgive them for their ignorance." This is very interesting because you're in the middle of battle. They're trying to kill you. They almost killed you. And yet the Prophet is saying, "Oh Allah, forgive them for their ignorance." Right? And so this is a very interesting point, because sometimes when you have people that are trying to bash Islam, Islamophobes, they'll never mention these things. And there's so much of this. They'll try to highlight other things and without context. They try to highlight other things without context. They don't show you things like this. It's a very beautiful supplication. The Prophet is basically saying, "Oh Allah, forgive them for their ignorance," meaning they're hearing me. I'm your messenger. You chose me to deliver the message, yet they still don't get it. They still don't get that I am the one who chose to deliver the message to them. So you can tell that these people are still in their ignorance, like deep in their ignorance of not recognizing a messenger of God, right? It's a very interesting point, okay? So what the Muslims do, because obviously they're losing now, they climb up a hill. So there's a close by hill, they climb up the hill, and then Abu Sufyan, who's the leader of the Quraysh, right? He basically says, this day is revenge for Badr. He basically, as the Muslims, they retreat, right? Remember the Quraysh retreated? Now the Muslims are retreating, right? Why? Because of the cavalry, right? The Muslims retreat onto a hill, and basically Abu Sufyan says, this day is revenge for Badr. But then the Prophet told him, he told one of the companions to say that respond by saying, this is actually not the same thing. They're two different things, because the Muslims, they're in paradise. Because, if you die in battle and you die on the religion of Islam, you're in paradise, right? This is the belief. But the pagans, the idol worshippers who are attacking us, they're in the hellfire. So it's not the same thing. If you're trying to make it the same, it's actually not the same thing. Why? Because the Muslims are in paradise and the non-Muslims are not, right? So some statistics, some numbers that came out roughly about what happened in this battle, they say about 70 Muslims passed away. So it was a loss. The Muslims did lose this battle, right? 22 from the Quraysh were dead. So 70 from the Muslim side, right? And 22 from the Quraysh side, okay? The Quraysh, now this is very, I don't mean to be very explicit, but at this point you'll find what happens after the war. Now you remember what happened after the Battle of Badr and they had the prisoners of war, right? Now compare it to what happens here. Because the Quraysh win, what they try to do now is they start to disfigure and they start to mutilate the bodies of the Muslims that are dead. So there's reports of like cutting off like ears, and this is from the non-Muslim side, right? Because they want, this is what they're doing to the Muslims that are dead. They were, and this is authentically reported, they were cut off, they would make necklaces out of like ears and nose and things of that of the Muslims that passed away. This is authentically reported. One of the most interesting, or not interesting, but one of the most explicit narrations was what happened to Hamza. Hamza was the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, right? He was killed in this battle, right? So, and there's a long story of, they got someone specifically to go and kill Hamza. It's a long story, right? It's very interesting if anybody has the time. But what happened was when Hamza was laying there and he was dead, right? Hind, who was the wife of Abu Sufyan, right? I know there's a lot of names being thrown out there. If you could remember them, they're good, but it's not like going to be on an exam or something like that, right? Abu Sufyan, just remember he's the leader of the non-Muslims. His wife her name is Hind. Hind basically comes, she cuts open Hamza, right? And takes out the organs and specifically his liver and chews on this liver. So again, I'm sorry, everyone is eating food and tacos, right? I do apologize, but this is something that's is authentically reported that that's what she did. That she actually took out the liver, the organs, and took out the liver of Hamza and chewed and bit on it. But it was so, obviously, tasting something like that, she just kind of like spat it out. But that's one of the promises she made after Badr, because in Badr, many of her family members passed away. So she wanted to also look for revenge, and she said she would do something like this. And so you see two different things happening, right? At the Battle of Badr, did the Muslims take place or do anything like this? They didn't. They didn't. They did the opposite. And the opposite was to treat them even better. They give them the good food, the good clothing, if you guys remember that, right? But now it comes to this, and you see what happens here, right? And many times, people, they don't give context. They'll say, oh, this battle happened, that battle happened, but they won't mention things like this, right? So I remind myself, and I remind everyone here, when you hear of certain things that happen, and people, when they're trying to bash Islam, know that there's always context behind it. The Muslims did this. Okay, what's the context of it? I don't know. Maybe you should look at the context before making a statement, right? The Muslims killed 400 people. Okay, what led to that happening? I don't know. Okay, it might be interesting to know. So what we try to do in this class is try to give you context, right? Remember, in Islam, it's very simple. We talked about it last week, and I mentioned this a few times. The general policy in Islam is always repentance and forgiveness. Always. You forgive someone, and you're more rewarded when you're patient, right? But at the same time, if you don't put your foot down, what's going to happen? They're going to walk all over you, and people are going to take advantage of you. This happens in the workplace. I mentioned this happens in school. If the teacher or the manager doesn't have some policies, and they don't implicate their policies, then you're going to just walk all over them. You'll come late every time to class. But this is why they have a tardy policy. The boss says this is why you follow, right? Islam, again, generally you're always going to find peace. You're always going to find forgiveness and repentance. But at times you have to put your foot down, because Islam's it doesn't teach us to be punching bags. That people just punch us all day and all night. No doubt, have patience and forgive people. But at the end of the day, you have to also put your foot down, right? According to the circumstances as well, right? But really quickly, it's very interesting, Hind being the wife who did this, right? It's interesting because what happens to him down the line? She actually becomes Muslim. Abu Sufyan, who is a leader of the non-Muslims, what happens to him? He actually becomes Muslim. Khalid ibn Walid, who led the cavalry from the backside and killed the Muslims, what happened to him? He became Muslim. Why am I saying this? What's an important lesson for us? Somebody new, if you don't mind. Very, very important to us today. Yes, Sister Shay. Perfect. Exactly what Sister Shay said. She said that never judge a book by its cover, basically, because you don't know who's going to become a Muslim. Somebody, there's people that are really trying to attack Islam. It's a multi-million, if not obviously billion-dollar industry, right? But some of these individuals, they ended up becoming Muslim, right? And so you have to have a level of patience with them. You have to this is why it's such a beautiful balance in Islam, right? That a lot of these individuals that are attacking Islam and saying negative things about Islam, they actually become Muslim. If you know the story of Sheikh Yusuf Estes, maybe some of you heard the story. In the beginning, he was not a big fan of Islam, right? He actually, when he met the individual that was talking to him about Islam, he said, "I'm ready to convert this guy, and he was really kind of against Islam, right? But then what happened? By the permission of Allah, he was actually guided to Islam. So it's a very important lesson we find through the life of the Prophet and in Islam, that even if somebody's attacking you, even if somebody's saying things wrong about you, always have the level of patience. Always have the level of courtesy and respect to one another. It could be family members. It could be co-workers. Has this happened to anyone that was really, really aggressive, but then the next thing you heard or you found out they actually became Muslim? Has it happened to anyone? Has it? Okay. So one person, okay. If not, it's happened to John? Yeah, okay. Trust me, it happens. And I've seen it as well, right? So just always keep that in mind, inshallah, God willing. Okay? Now, At this time, the Prophet is still bleeding from his wound, but the verses come down in the Quran about this specific scenario. And just to paraphrase, God basically says the reason why the Muslims lost is because of greed. Greed meaning because, why? What were they doing? What did they? Yeah, they went for the spoils of war, right? When the battle wasn't technically over. You understand? It wasn't technically over, so they went for the spoils of war. This is why God is basically saying the reason why you lost in Uhud is because the greed. And reminding us, right, as Muslims, that don't be too attached to the worldly things. There's nothing wrong. You can have fun and enjoy it. Don't go to extremes in either way, right? But at the same time, it shouldn't override your love and your passion for God, right? Again, nothing wrong with enjoying yourself and so forth, right? So what happens, and it's a very interesting point if you see, right? Sometimes what we do is we look at the life of the Prophet, and we see also, we read about the stories of the companions, and we treat them like, and no doubt, we treat them with the utmost respect. But at the end of the day, they're still human beings. You understand what I'm saying? Sometimes we treat them like, oh my God, they're such like out there and we can never comprehend. This is showing us very clearly like even they lost in battle. Even they have shortcomings. This is why so much information is preserved for us today until the day of judgment to learn from these things. So when you read through the life of the Prophet, you see him being a human being. You see the companions are human beings. Right? But sometimes we get in this notion like, oh, we can never reach that level. And obviously they have another level, meaning the reason they were chosen to be the companions is because God chose them, right? But for us, it's a learning mechanism to learn from what they went and what they went through, right? So, any questions so far? Up until this point? Is it everybody on the same page? Okay, pretty good, good. Okay, now, due to the loss in this battle, the Battle of Uhud, what happened after the Battle of Badr, if you remember? When they won, around Arabia, basically, what news was being spread? Positive or negative about the Muslims? Positive, right? Because they won. A smaller group defeating a larger group, right? What do you think happens now after the Battle of Uhud? Negative, right? In the sense that, oh, they lost. So the morale of the Muslims is down. They lost the battle, so they might, so this, again, they're thinking about this Islam thing is a phase, it's going to go away, and this is a good example of it, right? So different tribes, they start to take advantage of this. Different tribes that are not Muslim, they start to take advantage of this, because remember, there's still a lot of resentment, a lot of hostility towards Muslims, okay? One tribe in particular sends a message to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and says, send us your best people, so that they can teach us the message of Islam. Mosque, the Prophet is always in the mosque. So you're going to also wash them out, then I come to this amount. Perfect. That's a really good example too. Sister Amal says to learn about his character and to also learn that there's certain things that he goes through, we know how to also react as Muslims as well. Sister Zara? Definitely. So, yeah. He's a final messenger of God. So everything what people said, it's true. But remember, in order for somebody to become a Muslim, right? How do you become a Muslim? You have to say something called the Shahada, or the declaration of speech. That is that you bear witness, or you acknowledge, or you testify that there is none to be worshipped but Allah, and what? That the Prophet Muhammad is the messenger of God. Thus, if you accept the Prophet Muhammad being the messenger of God, it's probably wise to learn about him, to know who he is, right? So if somebody asks you why the Prophet Muhammad, you're in a position to at least respond back. Yes? Perfect. Right. In order for you to love someone, don't you need to know them? In order for you to love someone, you need to know them. So what Sister Zara says is very important. In order for us to love the Prophet Muhammad, right? Peace be upon him, we need to know who he is, right? This is why it was very important for us to make sure that we're teaching this class, right? Again, at a very basic level. I try not to go too much into depth. Just understand that volumes can be written about this. I mentioned like Dr. Yasser Qadi. If those of you are familiar, is a very great speaker and a very good scholar. He's done a series on the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It's 110 parts or something, 104 parts. Each part is about like an hour and 20 minutes. So you can imagine the type of work that he's putting. So for those of you, if you want to go a bit more academic and get some more information and go into depth, I would suggest you to also view that. But I want to make sure first our foundation is laid at a very basic level, and then from there you can go into in-depth. But it's always good to get a foundation down first. But that's anything with Dr. Yasir Qadhi is amazing, right? As far as his lectures. And by the way, on both sides, I put this list of speakers on this paper. Help yourself if you haven't got one of these. These are just some list of speakers, some new Muslim websites, and so forth. So help yourself. There should be a few on the sister side, a few on the brother side, inshallah. So help yourselves. Okay? So let's continue with session 9. Okay, session 9 meaning, I know we're on part like 22. Each session we break down into about 2 to 3 parts. Just because I can't give you 3 hours worth of information in one setting, you would probably just kill me, right? And everybody would probably leave. So I try to break it up to make it not too long, if it's okay, right? Now, we are in the 4th year of the Hijrah. Okay, 4th year meaning after the Muslims went from Mecca to Medina, okay? And that is that we're talking about the Banu Nadir. We come to the Banu Nadir. Now remember, in Medina, the Muslims were living alongside the Jewish tribes, right? We talked about a few Jewish tribes. We talked about Banu Qaynuqa, the first tribe, 2 weeks ago or last week. Now we're talking about the expulsion of the Banu Nadir, another tribe called Nadir, okay? Now, around this time, now remember, this is after the Battle of Uhud. They've lost, the Muslims have lost, right? But at the same time, intelligence is still there to see, making sure that, hey, are the Quraysh coming back, anybody else coming back, so forth, right? Now, the Prophet hears and gets news that the Jews of the tribe of Nadir were going to betray, and they were going to break the contract. Remember, they had an understanding and they had a contract, right? With all the other tribes, a treaty and so forth, that they would help one another, they would protect the land from foreign invasion, that if there's something happened between the Muslims and the Jews, a conflict happened between them, that the Prophet Muhammad, arbitration, he would be the one who's going to take care of it, right? So we come to the Banu Nadir. And so the Prophet, upon hearing this intelligence that the Banu Nadir are going to break the contract, what does he do? He always verifies. He verifies the information. He goes to the tribe, the Banu Nadir, and he asks them, he kind of talks to them like, are you guys still on the contract, right? So during this time that the Prophet, along with some of the companions, they go to visit the Banu Nadir and some of the leaders, remember they're in fortresses, right? They actually tried to kill him. So the Banu Nadir, known as the Jewish tribe, one of the Jewish tribes, they tried to kill the Prophet Muhammad. How did they try to do this? They tried to take a boulder, like if you imagine a big rock, and they went to almost the second floor, second level, and the Prophet being on the first level, and they were going to drop this on him to kill him. The Prophet, obviously being a messenger of God, he's divinely inspired, right? The archangel tells him, like, leave right now, because they're going to take your life. Leave right now. So imagine the Prophet Muhammad just walks out. He just simply walks out, and the companions are just sitting there like, okay, like, what happened, right? And they're sitting there. They finally come out, and they say, oh, messenger of God, what happened? You just left. He said, they were trying to kill me. And the angel Gabriel came to me and he told me that they had a boulder that they were going to drop on me to try to kill me. So now they know that they are going to break the contract. What happens then is that the Prophet, peace be upon him, informs them that you have 10 days to leave and that you can take your stuff with them. But he says because of this treachery or this type of breaking of the contract, you're not safe. It's not safe to have you within the walls of Medina anymore. So you have 10 days to leave. You have 10 days to leave and to take your stuff with you. Now, it's very important to understand, it's not, sometimes people make this rhetoric in the media or just people that are very misinformed that Muslims hate the Jews and it's a Jewish thing. It's not the people. It's what they did. Does everybody understand? We don't marginalize the Jews. The Jews actually in the Quran, they're part of the Christians known as the Ahl al-Kitab. What is that? The people of the book. So this is a sign of honor because they had a type of revelation or book. So it's not like the Muslims hate the Jews kind of thing, right? Unfortunately, people take this out of proportion, right? It's against what they did. It's not against the people. It just so happened to be the Jewish people. But you'll find that the Quran mentions, woe to those that steal and they lie, they cheat. So it's across the board against anyone who breaks commandments and rules and laws. So I want to make sure everybody understands that this is not specifically against just because they're Jewish people. That's not the case, right? So in this case, the Banu Nadir, they fortified themselves, just like the Qaynuqa, the other fortress, the other tribe in their fortresses, right? Meaning they stay in their fortresses. They don't let nobody in and nobody out, right? So what happens after a period of time, they surrender. The Banu Nadir, this Jewish tribe, they surrender because obviously the Muslims are there, right? And one can say because they had a shortage of food maybe, or they knew that, look, it's over. We broke the contract. They were getting ready for war, the Banu Nadir, and we lost. So basically, they asked and they started to negotiate with the Muslims, specifically the Prophet Muhammad, for leniency and respect. Not respect, leniency and negotiating something, because they understand what they did. They tried to break the treaty. Specifically, they tried to kill the Prophet of God, peace be upon him, right? So what happens is, the Prophet comes with his ultimatum. He says, you know what, that's fine. What you guys can do, you guys are all excused, meaning in a sense you need to leave. You can leave with yourself, but you need to go, right? Just remember, international law at that time would dictate other things, killing of people and so forth, because of the contract and the stipulations that they broke, right? In this case, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he says, you guys just go, just leave. You have X amount of days to leave, and take your things with you. You can take your things with you. And it's narrated that when you go into, when you study the life of the Prophet more deep, the amount of things that the Jewish tribes were taking with them, and you would find so much of like possessions that they had that they always kept to themselves. And you would kind of, everybody was looking at this like, wow, these individuals had so much, yet they kind of kept it to themselves. They would never be in a process of kind of sharing and so forth, right? What they did, they relocated north to an area or city called Khaybar. Khaybar is going to be very important. It's going to be something that comes up later in the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, right? So even with this, and the Prophet, remember, the Muslims had the full authority at this time because of the laws and regulations at that time of what they did to be even harsher, if you will, in the punishment, right? But even with this leniency, the Jews were still wanted revenge for being kicked out of their lands, even though they tried to kill the Messenger of God, peace be upon him, right? This leads very directly to the next battle, the battle of the trench, also known as Khandaq or Ahzab. The battle of the Khandaq or Ahzab. Ahzab, basically, if you translate it, it just means confederates or a group or different groups that kind of like came together, right? Khandaq is like a trench. And we're going to come to the reason why it was called the Battle of the Trench, okay? So, everybody with me so far? Or am I going too fast? Are there any questions up until this point? No? Everybody okay? Yes? Shay? You didn't have a question? Okay. Is it clear? I'm sorry. That's okay. Khaybar, yes, I can give you the Khaiber. And I just know that it could be spelled differently, but generally it'll be around that, inshallah, God willing. Okay? Now, being that the Banu Nadir, this is the tribe that just got, they were kicked out of their lands in the sense because they tried to kill the Prophet. There's justification, right? Anytime somebody said they were kicked out of their lands, you have to inquire, okay, why? What's the context of this, right? There's context. And remember that the Prophet has been very patient. You can start from the Battle of Badr, even before the Battle of Badr, when they were being persecuted in Mecca. Patience, patience, patience. Still at this time, patience. Huyay is the chief of the Banu Nadir, the tribe that just got kicked out, right? Huyay basically, and obviously he takes it to the heart that, look, we just got kicked out. We want revenge. We really don't agree, and we hate this messenger of God. We don't acknowledge him and so forth. His story is very interesting. It's going to come up again if we have a chance, right? So what does he do? He goes to, who else would he go to? He goes to the Quraysh in Mecca. Remember, the Meccans are still there. The Quraysh are still there. Remember, you have Medina, you have Mecca. Huyay from Medina goes to Mecca and says, you know what? We're with you. Let's gather up a lot of soldiers, and for once and for all, let's just eliminate the Muslims. Right? Let's just do this. And he says, I give you support from the Jewish end that we're going to have the tribes, all the tribes will be with you. So obviously the Quraysh, they just won the second battle, right? The Battle of Uhud. So they're saying, you know what? Yeah, we won. We can just eliminate them, right? So they start to do this. There's a lot of propaganda going on, a lot of saying, hey, we need to get revenge and so forth. So the Quraysh, along with the Jewish tribes, they muster up about 10,000 soldiers. One of the biggest armies, if not the biggest armies at this time, 10,000 soldiers of the non-Muslims, right? Along with, so the 10,000 includes, right, the Arab tribes and the Jewish tribes, all to attack who? Islam, to attack the Muslims, right? Now, what does the Prophet do? He gets intelligence. So this is very important because he's getting information. He's letting people know he's proactive. He doesn't just sit in the mosque and do nothing. He is like finding out what is the world news, what's going on, right? And this shows us a very prime example for us that, we need to be aware of the political climate. The Prophet is, because this is why he knows what certain things are happening, right? So it's always good to know what's happening in the world, right? So now he finds out and he says, you know what? Basically, look, 10,000 people are coming from the non-Muslims, the Quraysh. What should we do? He's consulting, right, with the companions. So they basically, on the Muslim side, they come to about 3,000. They come to about 3,000 soldiers on the Muslim end, okay? So you have about 10,000 to 3,000, okay? Again, still a significant number, but nowhere close to the difference between the two, right? Salman al-Farsi, this is a very interesting story. Salman al-Farsi, he says, you know what, I have an idea. Remember, Salman al-Farsi, what was he? He was Persian. Farsi, Persian. He said, in our lands, when we have this type of battle, what we would do, we would build trenches. I.e., this is why it's called the Battle of the Trench, right? They would build trenches, and the whole point of this trench was to make sure that the enemy wouldn't cross into your land. The enemy, they wouldn't cross into your land, right? So Salman gives his advice, and he says, you know what, it basically worked, right? Now the Arabs, remember, because the Persians are in a different area, the Arabs are in a different area, the Arabs, they weren't accustomed to this. They say, we never heard of something like this. But they say, you know what, this is a great idea. So what do? They start to build the trench. They start to build the trench, right? And the trench, they build it around Medina so that when the Quraysh do come, because they're on their way, they won't be able to cross over. Now, when you talk about the desert, don't always imagine the desert being just sand. In Arabia, you have mountains, right? You have, they have like volcano and so forth, right? So the parts where Medina was not protected, they would make a trench. But along with that trench, I don't have a map, but along with the trench, you would have the mountains, right? So you wouldn't need to build a trench there. Why? Because it's mountains, you're not really going to try to cross over them. And if you try, it'll be very difficult, right? Okay, so you have a trench, and then you have mountains, okay? And on the other end, you have one of the Jewish tribes that live to the south. So the south, the way it's being protected is one of the, which we're coming to right now, it's called Bani Qurayza. Bani Qurayza. This is a tribe that protects the south part of Medina. They're in a contract with the Muslims to say, you know what? That we were protected from, remember, foreign invasion. What was the contract that the Muslims had with the Jews? What was one of the stipulations? Protection, right? If there's a foreign invasion, that they all get together to protect the land because it's their homeland, right? So remember, the Jews were out to the south. This is the third of the three tribes. We talked about Qaynuqa, we talked about Nadir. You don't need to know the names, but this is the third of the three Jewish tribes, the three main Jewish tribes in Medina. And also know that they had rivalry amongst themselves too. It's not like all three got along. They had issues amongst themselves, these three Jewish tribes, okay? So now, when the Quraysh come, they were taken by surprise because they've never seen something like this, as far as the trench, right? They've never seen something like this. So they start to say, like, what are we going to do? Because it was so wide that you would not be able to cross over. That's how wide it was, right? And they go into different dimensions and how long it was. And, they worked for almost, I think it's 2 weeks straight. And mentioned it was a 15-foot deep trench. And they worked for almost 2 weeks straight to figure out how to kind of have this trench, right? Being that they had such limited time, not the entire trench wasn't equal. I mean, there were some parts that might not have been equal. So there were some parts with the Quraysh, they were able to cross over. They were able to cross over, right? And so you had certain members of the Quraysh that were able to cross over. They would have a duel with the Muslims, but the Muslims will win. But in general, they weren't able to cross over. There were a few incidents, but in general, because the trench was so well built, they weren't able to cross over, okay? So what happened at this time was, we're just going to fast forward a little bit. They waited for a very long period of time, right? And basically, they ended up, a strong wind came and a strong wind and kind of like a storm came. And the Quraysh basically said, look, we need to go. This is not working. We cannot we cannot cross over into the trench. This is simply not working. We need to go. They also got intelligence that the Bani Qurayza, right, the Jewish tribe to the south, they were going to break their alliance, their treaty with the Muslims, right? This is coming to our third incident now. That they were no longer going to be agreeing with the Muslims because the Quraysh said, look, we have 10,000 people. You guys they only have 3,000. If you join us, meaning you break your contract with the Muslims and you let us come in from the south, right? Because the only place that wasn't fortified was where? The south, right? Where the Jewish tribe was their fortress, right? They basically said, look, if you let us come in through there, right? we will get rid of the Muslims once and for all, right? But then they had some disagreements. A few different things happened between the Quraysh and this tribe, right? Even though the tribe said, you know what, that's fine. We'll break the contract. So this was going against the contract, right? That they had with the Muslims at that time. Let me just make sure I have this point. Okay, so now the Prophet, peace be upon him, hears about this treachery. He hears about this treachery that, you know what, the Jewish tribe are going to break the contract. He goes, and what does he do? He verifies. He verifies that this information, is this happening or not? And it's true that it did happen, right? That they were going to break the contract. They basically said, look, we don't have any understanding of your contract and we don't know what you're talking about, right? So from the permission of Allah, obviously, the battle, there was no actual battle that happened. The Muslims won and they left, right? Because, as I mentioned, the storm came, and so this group of 10,000 said, like, this is not working, we need to turn around, we need to go. They go, what happens to this Jewish tribe? The Jewish tribe, they wanted to break the contract, but they lost. So now they understand that we broke the contract. And now the Muslims, basically, it was a symbolic victory, right? There was no actual big battle that took place. It was a symbolic victory, but the thing was, it was 3,000 Muslims, right, that were able to withstand, how many people? 10,000. It's a symbolic victory that's sending shockwaves throughout Arabia and the world at that time, right? That a small group, again, was able to withstand, not letting 10,000 non-Muslims come, right? Now, the Prophet, peace be upon him, he's going back home. You can imagine, almost 1 month, if I'm not mistaken, give or take, of this. He comes home, and the angel Gabriel comes and he says, you know what? The battle's not finished yet. We need to go, or you need to go to the Bani Qurayza. We need to take care of the situation with this Jewish tribe, okay? So now what happens? So about 1 month, okay? Now what happens is that the Muslims, they go and they do the same thing. They go and fortify. They go and they besiege the Bani Qurayza. This is the third Jewish tribe, okay? The third tribe. And they tell them, like, look, you broke the contract, okay? Now, they know that they're getting ready for war, but they know that they broke the contract. They broke the stipulations. So they said, you know what, basically, we understand that we broke the rules, but please be lenient with us. They're trying to negotiate. But the difference here in this scenario, again, with the context that we've been building up to, this is not against just one individual. This is against what? What did they do? It was against all of the Muslims. Because if they had let the Quraysh come, which they wanted to from the south, they would have no protection. And so all the Muslims were at a chance of being killed. The tribe before, they just tried to kill who? Just the Prophet Muhammad, not the entire army. But in this case, it's a little bit different, it's really different, because they tried to eliminate all of the Muslims, which is a huge no-no, obviously, at this time. So the Jews, they say, you know what? We understand that you have to arbitrate between us, because this is an understanding that we have something happens between the Jews and the Muslims, that the Prophet Muhammad has to say. He says, let us select one individual. Let us select one individual who will be the one who's going to judge based on what happens. So they say, we want to choose Sa'd ibn Mu'adh. This term is, his name is very famous. He's one of the most famous companions, right? He has a very special status. Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, he basically says, and he's injured in battle. So for about 1 month, he's bleeding. And this is a wound that he actually dies from it, right? So imagine he's taken on a stretcher to the location, and they basically say, look, we give you the permission to make the verdict of what should happen in this case. Should we get killed? Should we get expelled? What should happen? The reason why they chose Sa'd, anybody know? Anybody know why they chose Sa'd? Or why they might have chosen Sa'd? Just take a guess, if you want. Not that I'm expecting anyone, Sis Ahmad? Yes. So Sa'd ibn Mu'adh was someone that he did a lot of business with the Jews before Islam came, right? Sa'd was he was from Medina. He was not from Mecca. He was from Medina. So he had a lot of business that was happening. If I'm not mistaken, he's from Medina. They had a lot of business, right? So thus, he was so fair in his business, and they had such a relationship as far as maybe friendship and so forth. They said, you know what, he's a good guy. He's going to do good. He won't give us a harsh treatment. This is why they said we choose Sa'd. From everybody that they chose, or they could have chosen, they chose Sa'd. They said, we'll choose Sa'd. Why? Because we know he'll give us a light punishment, or a light way, or a consequence, or a conclusion, right? And then Sa'd says, you know what? He says, if I give my verdict, will you agree to my verdict? And they said, yes, the Jewish tribe. They said, we agree to your verdict. And then he also looks at the Prophet Muhammad, and look at, it's amazing. He lowers his head and he says, oh Messenger of God, you agree with the verdict that I give? And imagine, he doesn't even look in the eyes out of respect, right? It's kind of like, when a child looks at their parents, out of respect, you might look down. The companion, Sa'd, he says, he doesn't even look at the Prophet. He looks down, he says, oh Messenger of God, and you too? Meaning you will also be okay with whatever verdict I give? The Messenger of God said, yes, they chose you, so whatever verdict you want to give, by all means. So then Sa'd says, you know what, because of what you did in the treachery, we will judge from your own book. And from their own book, and I would love for everyone, I wanted to bring it up. It's actually in Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 12 to 14. It mentions to kill. It's to execute all the adult male fighters. So the adult male fighters. And so this is what happened. So all those that fought against the Muslims, or they were going to fight, they were executed. This is based on the Bible itself. The chapter, the context of this is based on the battle itself, right? Now, you can already see why this might be a bit problematic. Not problematic, but why people would today kind of be like, oh my God, the Muslims did this. Without context, you'll never understand this. Anybody can say the Muslims went out and they killed X amount of people, right? But if they don't tell you the reasoning why, remember, we start from the Battle of Badr. What happens with the prisoners of war? Leniency. The first Jewish tribe, leniency. The second Jewish tribe, leniency. The third one, it's not even the Prophet Muhammad who makes this choice. He gives it to Sa'd ibn Mu'adh. Sa'd ibn Mu'adh says, we will judge from your book, meaning to the Jews. We will judge from the Bible. And that is, and this is the reference for it. So all the male adults, they were executed. They were killed, right? If you don't explain the context of this, people won't understand, right? So again, we mentioned this whole idea and the concept of general mercy, right? And general forgiveness, right? But at the same time, there are parts and times where you will find in the life of the Prophet that one has to put their foot down so that people can understand. So at this time, the Prophet says, your verdict, Sa'd, is in line with what God wanted. Your verdict, Sa'd, is correct because this is what God's answer was as well. This is what God's verdict was as well. Now, let's pause real quick, okay? Again, this is not against, it's what they did, it's not who they are. It's not against the people, it's what they did. And this is something, again, it is not targeted towards one or two individuals. This was targeted against all of the Muslims because, again, they broke the treaty and they would have been able to come from the south, thus been able to kill mass amounts of Muslims, right? This is why this stipulation was given. Anytime people bring this up, right? Because this is something, if you talk to people that really attack Islam or Islamophobes, this is one of the main things they will try to bring up. They say, look what the Muslims did and so forth, right? It's actually very easy to respond if they know the context. The first thing you would ask is, do you know the context? What do you think the answer is? Many other times, no. Second thing, all you have to do is, and it's just using common sense, turn the tables. You can, if you like, on your free time, just go ahead and Google in the Bible the different types of wars and practices and things that happen in the Bible. And when you compare it to the Quran, it's a night and day difference. Night and day difference. This is just one right here, right? Deuteronomy 20 verses 12 to 14. This is what's in the Bible. In addition to this, there are many other verses about people being killed, mass amounts of people being killed, and put into different types of, many things like that. So because they don't give you the context and they don't know the whole book, they might try to box you into a corner. Again, believe me, be thankful and be proud to be a Muslim. You don't have to shy away from something like this, because this is the verdict from God Almighty, right? So as a Muslim, we don't have issues with this, because why? There's context that led to it. Now, if these are innocent people, of course, as Muslims, you'll be the first ones to stand up. But in this case, right, there's something that happened, multiple things that happened. And also, in addition to, when the adult males, not the women and children, adult males were killed, there were some cases of people being excused. Some cases of people being excused. Somebody would come to the Prophet and say, oh, Prophet, please excuse this Jewish individual. He's older. I owe him a favor. The Prophet said, okay, he's excused. That happens with a few people, anywhere from 2 to 4, maybe 5 people. So there is acts of leniency as well. And it's almost like people going up to the Prophet and say, please excuse this person because I owe him a favor, and one of the favors I can give him now is to basically help him in this case, right? So with that, I know there's a lot of information. I do have a video, but before the video, I want to make sure I took any questions or concerns or comments anybody had. Yes? Your name again, Akhi? Abdul Razak? Yes. Oh, Abdul Razak with John. Yes, mashallah. That's all my announcements here, inshallah. Yes, Fadl. So the first question is, did they have the opportunity to convert or revert at the time? So there are some narration, if I'm not mistaken, that some people did become Muslim. So they had the opportunity to say, you know what, this is the truth. But in addition to that, you remember the Huyay. Huyay was the leader of the Nadir tribe. So he mentioned when he, at the end, basically when he was going to be killed, as he was walking, he said, you know what, and he confronted, this is authentically reported, he confronted the Prophet, he said, you know what, and I'm paraphrasing, I just really despise you, I don't believe in you as a messenger, but we see God's verdict, and God will humiliate whoever he wants to humiliate. So even at the end, he acknowledged that though I don't believe in you and I don't like you, you are the messenger of God indirectly. But he still had a lot of pride. But yeah, there are some reports, if I'm not mistaken, of people becoming Muslim. Not a big group, but there were some people that, they said, you know what, we want to become Muslim. Others said, you know what, we're going to die with our faith, the faith of our forefathers. Yeah. You had two questions? Yeah. Killed? Yeah. So the second question, how many of them were roughly killed? There are different narrations. Some say anywhere from 400 to 700 male adults. Not the women, not the children. 400 to 700 male adults. Some narrations go even higher than that, but to be on average, they say anywhere from 400 to 700. Yeah. But again, when people bring this up, just know, when you turn the tables and you see in the Bible itself, you see a number like this way more than that. And different things that happen, And all you have to do is do a simple Google, violence and killing in the Bible, and you see a list of different things that come up. Yeah. Thank you so much. You're most welcome. Shay, you had a question? Yeah. Mm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so Sister Shay is just mentioning when you go to the Old Testament, right, when you have the Bible, the Old and the New Testament, when you're in the Old Testament, there's many different cases of many hundreds, if not thousands of people dying. Sister Shay is mentioning one of them with Solomon and the Spirit. I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure if it's talking about the Archangel Gabriel or in different contexts. And this, I think, is even with Christian scholars, they try to decipher this, and they amongst themselves, they probably have a difference of opinion, just like they do with the Trinity. A lot of people, they can't even explain the Trinity. So when it comes to even that aspect, is kind of, I'm sure it's a difference of opinion with them. Yes, Angela. And please feel free to ask any question. Don't feel shy. Things like this, one doesn't need to be shy about. This thing, it happened. There's no need to water it down. As Muslims, you don't water things down. You say it as it is, but you say it with the context, right? But if you don't know how to respond to something like this, don't make it up either, right? If somebody comes up to you and you know the answer, but don't water things down. Islam is the truth, and we believe sincerely it's the truth, and with context, everything makes sense. Sorry, Angela. Culture aspect to what? Oh, okay. Yeah. So Angela's mentioning that there's an aspect of like culture in the Bible, different from religion. I would question that just because, like in Islam, right? And she's talking about the Bible, and I appreciate that. In Islam, one always has to decipher between religion and culture. And being new Muslims, I'm sure most of you got a taste of this already, and if you haven't, you will. A lot of people, they try to say, do this and do that, and it might just be cultural. A lot of people are nodding your heads, yeah. You have to be able to know how to decipher or distinguish religion from culture. Nothing's wrong with culture, as long as what? It doesn't conflict with the religion. So like different cultural foods. Nothing wrong with that, as long as it doesn't conflict religion, right? In our culture, we do something like this. I'm making something up. We do something special on Thursday, and in the Quran, we do this. If this is something that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, never did, and the companions never did, why are we going to invent something new? You see what I'm saying? So it's more like an innovation. So it's very, so to come to your answer, no. Everything is based on our sources. And the sources, how we derive rules and regulations in Islam are from our two primary sources. The first one being the Quran, which is the verbatim, the exact word of God. The second being the Sunnah, or the way of the Prophet, the Hadith, which explains the Quran. These are our two sources that we get rules and regulations from, right? The 5 daily prayers. We don't just randomly say, hey, it's 5 times. Wudu, ablution. We don't just randomly. No, it has to come from somewhere. Where does it come from? These two sources. So anytime you find something in the Quran or anything about the battles, you're going to find it in this context. Anything outside of that, then you have to question it. Where did it come from? This is why, when I was mentioning the numbers, 400, some people might come with the higher number. Where did that number come from? If it's not something that's authentically reported, we don't take it, because it's something that's been fabricated. So it's a science of making sure it's been preserved. Okay, good question. Sister Amal. The women and children, yeah. So actually, I'll bring it up right here. I want everyone to read. I didn't have time to do it before class, but we can do it right now. This is, for those of you, if you haven't seen this, this is the verse that they were mentioning about, which is in the Bible, okay? We'll start from 12. Okay, is it okay. Okay, so if I'm not mistaken, it starts from 12 there. However, we're starting right over here. However, if it does not make peace with you, but makes war against you, then you shall besiege it. When the Lord your God gives it in your hand, you shall strike all the men in it with the edge of your sword. And the 14 is... 14 was here. And so that was 13, right? Verse 13. Can you guys see it up here? Yeah. When the Lord your God gives it in your hand, you shall strike all the men in it with the edge of your sword, or edge of the sword. Verse 14. Only the women and the children and the animals and all that is in the city, all of it spoils. All its spoils you shall take as your booty for yourself, and you shall use the spoil of your enemies which your Lord your God has given you. That's according to the Bible. That's the verse in the Bible. So what happened to the women and children? They were taken as captives from the Muslims. What happened from that point? I didn't get too many authentic reports. I don't know. Sheikh Musa didn't mention it in the thing. So I'm not sure what the reports of that are being. Some of them became Muslim. Others, in Islam, there was slavery in the beginning, but Muslims always try at the early age of getting rid of slavery. So they would say, who's going to release this person, who's going to release this person, who's going to unslave this person, who's going to, give this much money so this person is not a slave. So you find a lot of that. But at the end, it becomes something that was part of the Muslims, the booty, the spoils of war, so it went to the Muslims. Now, you have to understand the manners of the Muslims, you would understand the manners that they would treat something like this in. Very different from maybe the opposite end, right? So because it referred to the adult males being killed, don't think of it as the women and the children being killed as well. No, that was part of the captives, if you will. Yeah. Yes? Yeah, so no, the Jews came to Medina. But because remember, we talked about how they wandered. If you took the life of the prophets class, you see how they were wandering for many years, right? In the desert and so forth. So they ended up coming there, right? But the thing was that the Arabs were already there. So remember the two tribes, the Aus and the Khazraj. So remember when the Prophet went to Medina, there were already Arabs there. Why? Because they've been there for a very long period of time. So they were there for a long period of time, yeah. Most welcome. Any questions? Yes? Very good question. Yeah. Good question. The question is regarding what happens to someone that passes away or dies, and we're not certain that they're Muslim or not, right? Whether it's family member or anybody like that. See, in Islam, we speak in generalities. We don't talk in specifics. I can't say you go to heaven, you go to hell, you go to heaven, no. We speak in generalities. What does generalities mean? if somebody acknowledges that there is one God, there is one creator, and this creator has no partners, and believes in the prophet of their time, this is that one path. We believe there's one path to go to God. Okay? If somebody acknowledges, again, I'm going to restate what I'm saying. Somebody acknowledges that there is a creator, there is a God, okay? And this God has no partners. There's no shirk, there's no attachments or partners to him, right? And they believe in the prophet of your time. We're living in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, right? Then this is the road to paradise. We speak in generalities. Somebody asked me, how about Mother Teresa? What happens to her? We speak in generalities because the God is best of all judges. Now, there are going to be groups of people on the Day of Judgment, they might have valid excuses to say, you know what, I never heard of this message of Islam before. Do you think God would punish them for something that they didn't know? Think about it. We believe God is all just. He's all knowing. He's all wise. He will never punish someone for something that they had no idea of. So if somebody comes on the Day of Judgment and they say, and this is what some scholars say as well, that they never came across the message of Islam. Never. They never knew what the Quran was, anything like, literally they lived in a village somewhere and they had no idea. Then God will judge with them. We're not here to judge on people. That's why we don't say, oh, we're going to paradise, you're going to, no. You're always humble. You're optimistic, but you're always humble. This is why we always believe that we say God willing, inshallah, everything about the permission of God, right? So that answers that question in the sense that, there are going to be people on the Day of Judgment if they didn't get the message. But if you got the message is very clear to you, then you're going to have your chance that day to defend yourself. That's why it makes so much sense to have a Day of Judgment, have a day of accountability, because on that day, you'll be able to defend yourself in front of the Creator. But just know the Creator knows everything. So it's not like you can get away with something, right? But what I'm trying to say is for those that have a valid reason and only God knows, the Day of Judgment will be a day for them to ask for excuse, because to say, you know what, I never knew, right? And Allah knows best. Good question. Anybody else? Feel free, please. Is it Shay? Yeah. Wow, putting me on the hot chair today. No, just kidding. That's a good question. No, I'm just joking. The question Sister Shay brought up is that some people will go to the hellfire for a temporary period of time. So as Muslims, our theology, what we believe is that as Muslims, some Muslims will go to the hellfire. Some Muslims will go to the hellfire because of the actions that they did. But we believe it will be temporary. It could be, I don't know, a few days, few years, hundreds of years. God knows best. It's according to whatever God feels fit. Right? Again, that's why there's a Day of Judgment to distinguish that, to determine that. Say you lived a very sinful life, but you had an aspect of good. But there's still accountability. There's still something that you still need. In order for you to go to paradise, you have to be pure. You have to, one way or another, you have to pay your debt off. Like, when you go to jail, the whole idea is you pay your debt off to society. In the sense, if you commit a sin, there's a way that you need to purify yourself. So what God does, by His permission, if He chooses to, again, we also believe He's all merciful. And He'll have mercy that day, right? But again, I can't say we speak in generalities. We can't say this one is going to go here, this one won't go here, this one. We can't say that. We speak in generalities because God is the best of all judges. He will judge on that day. But we do believe as Muslims that there will be some Muslims that will visit the hellfire. And that's why we always ask Allah to save us from the hellfire, from the flames, from the blazing fire of hellfire. And that's why never be too confident. In the sense that don't be, not confident, don't be, that's a poor choice of words, don't be arrogant. That's why in our theology we don't believe just because somebody died for a sin, we don't believe that we have a free trip to paradise. We stay humble about it. We believe, God willing, that if you follow the rules, you just like you would in class, you follow the rules, the professor says something, you abide by it. Same way, whatever Allah said for us to do, and we follow it to the best of our abilities, we were good, sincere people, we'll go to paradise, inshallah, God willing. Right? But we have hope. Because the Creator will never be unjust. Allah will never be unjust. Everything happens is by His justice, right? But at the same time, we believe that no doubt some people will have to pay the debt off to before entering. Questions? I took you for a long period of time today. I do apologize. I wanted to make sure that we got the information. I'll hold the video until next week. Just a few announcements if it's okay. And again, if anybody has any questions, you can always email me, call me, contact me, so forth. No worries, right? There's a marriage event coming up. For those of you, if you're interested, I know many times people want to get married and know what is the lawful or the correct way to go about that. There's a marriage event happening on behalf of the OCIF, which is Orange County Islamic Foundation, which is the mosque in Mission Viejo. So if anybody's interested in that, it's happening April 15th, so in about 2 weeks. It's from 5:30 till 9:30. The flyer is outside. If you guys want to see, it's right. It's hung right on the glass notifications and on the side on the shelf as well. Second, for those of you that have been attending the class, we had some surveys that we were filling out. If you've attended the class a number of times, I would ask you to kindly fill the survey out. If this is your first time or your second time, don't worry about it. But if you've come quite a number of times before and you haven't filled this out, kindly do so you can just see me at the end of the class. It'll take you a few minutes just to kind of assess the class and let me know what's working, what is not working, inshallah, okay? Remember the babysitting, we always have. Anybody use babysitting today? Nobody used it today? There's no kids, okay. No. Yeah, no problem. But just know that if you do have children, they're most welcome to come, and they can use that. And also, I want to just recognize two guests that we have. And I want to first apologize. Our first guest is Ida. Ida, if you can just raise your hand for me, if you don't mind. Ida joined us a third time now, right? So I didn't get a chance to introduce myself or introduce her to class. Ida is joining us today. She's not Muslim, but she's looking into Islam. So we thank you for coming. We thank you for taking time out. And we ask Allah to open up your heart and to guide you to Islam. If you have any questions, anything like that, like I said, just let me know. You're most welcome. This mosque is open to you, so anytime you want to come, you're most welcome. Sisters, make sure at the end you introduce yourself to our sister. And our second guest, and it's not a guest now, we have with us John. John, if you can just raise your hand for me. John actually took his Shahada yesterday here at the mosque. He became Muslim yesterday, so, and it's right before I left, right before I left, he came right after, actually. I left right before he came in, but we had one of our other brothers here that talked to him. So, and Abdul Razak is joining him. You guys are neighbors, I think, if I'm not mistaken, or close, we're neighbors, right? So we want to welcome you, John. Congratulations, welcome to Islam. May Allah bless you. If you have a few minutes, I'd like to see you afterwards. Maybe I can give you a few things, right? And also we have our third guest, which is Adriana. Adriana, if you can just raise your hand. Adriana is also very close. He's really looking into Islam. He's finishing up at UCI. How much longer do you have left? Last year, okay, nice. So he's almost done at UCI, and he's been studying and looking into Islam for some time now. And God willing, when God gives him permission, he's very close to Islam. So we ask Allah to open up everyone's heart to Islam. And you find not only at this mosque, but mosques nationwide, so many people are embracing Islam because they research it. They don't force themselves. They research it, they investigate it. Just like our class here, majority of us are new Muslims or converts, meaning someone that was not Muslim, studied Islam, and came back to Islam, right? Just by show of hands, how many are converts or new Muslims in class? You can just raise your hand for me, please. If you can raise your hand. Who's a convert and a new Muslim in class? If you can just raise your hand for me. Okay, so if you can see a good number of our class, even though we are missing quite a number of people today, it's okay. But just to kind of give you an idea, right, of this message itself. So having said that, we're going to go ahead and conclude. I will need your help. Let's make sure we put the tables and chairs away where they go. Please, nothing against the wall. All the chairs, all the tables in the rack. I think we have some extra food. Sister Ruxana, we have extra food left over? Or no? Okay, so we're good. If there's some extra food left over, feel free to take it so we don't waste any food. We will see you on Friday with Coffee with the Sheikh at 6 p.m. If you can't make that, we will meet next Sunday for our class. May Allah bless you all. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Anybody go for the day? Yeah. Did? Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Just as a reminder, we have a Quran competition for the new Muslims. So the Quran competition in Ramadan for new Muslims, we made this announcement for the last 2 or 3 weeks. If you're interested in it, do let me know so I can get you the information, or you can go on the website for more information.
Assalamu alaikum. Sorry, there's another announcement. Again, the tacos were provided by our brothers and sisters. They're going on Umrah, so we're trying to help them out as far as providing anything we can financially. So if anybody wanted to donate, you could donate. So I'm sure there's a box there. Assalamu alaikum.